Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all. As Lorna said, this session is all about the sense of touch. So, of all the senses that we use to discover the natural world around us, unless you have a visual impairment, sight is the obvious one. But it's often other senses that, such as touch or smell, that provide us with meaningful and memorable experiences, connecting us with nature and our environment. Our senses are connected with memory, both past and in the present, to lay down new memories. So to build sensory connections, we need to have a variety of approaches to be able to work with a wide range of people with a wide variety of needs. So I'm going to talk today about some practical ways to experience the sense of touch using plant material and any spaces that you have. So to start with, I think if you do have an outdoor space, it's a good idea to go out into your outdoor space, if it's a garden or a landscape, and walk around and note which plants you have that might be useful. What sort of useful do we need? We need leaves or flowers, or even the bark of a tree, which are useful because of their texture, their flower, their leaf, or their bud shape, or, as I said before, the texture of trees. But before you decide which plants you're going to encourage people to interact with, it's a really good idea to find out what plants could be harmful. And you can get you can get a list of potentially harmful plants from the RHS. Here's one that I downloaded earlier. So if you go onto the RHS and put in potentially harmful garden plants, you can download their list and you can double check, if you don't already know, whether any of the plants would be toxic when eaten, because it's possible, even though they're not edible plants, people might put them in their mouths, or whether they're harmful when touched, whether they are allergic, they have an allergic reaction. The list here, which is also done by the Horticultural Trades Association, and I'll be putting that in my fact sheet, which goes with this session, lists plants with their common names, the name you might know them, or the botanical name, but you can at least always look it up. And it's listed in categories. So it starts off with category A, which is an absolute no-no at all, which is poison ivy, which is basically going to kill you. So not a good idea at all. Category B are ones that are likely to have some effect. And C are ones which has some effect, is not quite as bad. So that just gives you an idea. It's a very long list, but it's important that we take care of the people that we're looking after or who are with us. So there are obvious things that you can avoid, which is plants that have very serious thorns or spikes. So very thorny roses, not a good idea unless you cut off the flowers and use those in a session. So that's something which I think is fairly obvious for everybody. You want to have plants which are going to add to the experience of touch. And it may be when you're doing your survey of what you do have, you think, well, actually, I don't have enough things which would be useful to use or are big enough. So maybe it's a time to be noting what plants you might want to add in the future. Even if you don't know the names of them, you can say, I need to add a soft leaved one, or I need to add something with that's big and has big leaves, which good texture. So you can do that. If, however, you think, oh, we've got quite a lot of good plants in our landscape, in our garden, you could label the plants to make a trail for your group. A trail to indicate which plants are for touching and obviously which aren't for touching. And the Sensory Trust, which is a great organisation to look at, does things like this, where they show you arrows, so you can do a trail and put arrows up, and you can mark on the trail, and I hope you can see this, a hand, And you can either, they supply, if you order them, these labels, or you could make them up yourself. And there's an example, part of an example they have. And that indicates to people, and that would be quite fun, where they can go, what they can touch, as a beginning anyway, of doing that. So that's a great way of starting off using the plants that you already have. Now, if your group are not able to go out, then what you could do is take examples of each plant. And today I went round my own garden and had a look at what might be available to use on a tabletop for a group that might not be mobile enough to get out, or the weather's terrible and you need to do something. So I'm going to just have a look through and show you some of the plants that I've got before we talk about what plants we can be adding. I'm looking for plants with texture. So here we have a fern with lots of lovely, interesting leaves along it. So you can imagine someone closing their eyes and feeling that. What does it feel like? Are there more than one leaf? Yes, there's a spine. So you can get people to talk about how they feel about it. So that's a fern, which are great. I have checked all these against the list from the RHS, so I know that they should be safe to use. I had a small birch tree growing and I found birch leaves. So these are nice. They're small leaves. They're whole leaves, so not like the fern. What are the edges like? The edges are a bit in and out, aren't they? What's the feel of them? You'd think they'd be smooth, but actually, if you close your eyes and put your thumb on it, it's quite rough. And we've also got a little bit of bark as well to play with, so we can look at how that is and talk about what that feels like. So these are very ordinary leaves, nothing out of the ordinary. These are daylily leaves, which instead of being those smaller leaves, are tall and long. So again, there's a lovely long feel to them. Do they get smaller at the top? Do they have a spine? Are they folded? Do they feel silky or not silky? I wonder. So that's daylily leaves. What else? You can do this, and I'm sure you're going to find lots. This is a smoke bush. Now it's very coloured, so obviously if you're looking for colour, that would be great. But on this occasion, we're looking for leaves. So these are quite delicate, quite round, quite. So the idea is to get your group discussing what they feel. Do they like it? Do they perhaps not like it? Does it feel rough or does it feel smooth? Does it feel hairy? In this case, not. So those are some of the ones. If you're doing this perhaps in the winter when there's not going to be leaves on some of the deciduous plants, you could perhaps look for evergreens.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt, Caroline. For me, your sound keeps dipping in and out. I don't know if it's the same for everybody else. Sometimes I can hear some words and then it goes quite quiet.
Okay, I was talking about leaves that are evergreen and can be used in the winter when you haven't got so many leaves that on deciduous plants. So this is a Fatsia japonica or a castor oil plant, and you can see it's a big leaf with veins at the back, which are quite solid. It's got lots of shape. Someone describing that, I wonder how they would describe it. Big, wide leaf, slightly shiny leaves too. So that's a good one to have. Another one that I've looked at is a rhododendron with smaller leaves. And again, slightly shiny. And by saying, why is it shiny? I wonder why it's shiny. Is it to protect the leaf, perhaps, from too much sun? To allow the water to run off? Does it remind us of anything that we've had in our garden before when we were younger, perhaps? Or is it something that we'd like to grow? Here's a Camellia. And it's, again, closing my eyes. Oh, I can feel just this sort of plasticky feel about it. So these are ways of getting things just in your own landscape or garden and using them for a session with your group, where you discuss the experience and the feeling. Have these plants got soft, hairy, smooth, rough, large, small? Maybe there's another experience too. Maybe they have a smell, which is another sense, of course. And so with getting the group to feel them with their eyes shut, or maybe you have people with visual impairment who will obviously feel it. Perhaps you, as the group leaders, can write down some of the words that people have used when they're exploring the plants, either outside or, as I said, having brought them in. And you can start conversations about it. Who liked or disliked what they were feeling? Why do they think that is? Do people have memories of the plants and what they were and what they make them think about now? And then, as I said before, why are the plants hairy or shiny? The other thing you can do is to take some of the flowers that you might find in the garden, again, making sure that they're safe to use and that they're not going to spike anybody. This is a type of thistle called a Cirsium, but it's very soft. So it's not like the very hairy, spiky thistles that we know. And that has a lovely feeling in comparison, let's say, to this chive flower here, which is slightly more spiky, surprisingly. So sometimes flowers will surprise people and make them wonder what's happening. Here's a red Centranthus rubra, a red campion, which is a wildflower growing often by the seaside. And again, feeling that, I wonder if it's one flower. Is it lots of flowers? I can feel lots of individual flowers on there. And also you can feel the leaves and the stem. I wonder how tall it is. So there are all these things that we can talk about, which are just ordinary flowers that you find in the garden, or flowers that you think you might have to add as well. Another one, which is quite commonly grown here, is Fuchsia, isn't it? So that's got a very interesting shape to feel. Again, closing your eyes, touching it. Perhaps people want to draw what they think they felt. It's quite hard, actually, and it has long stigmas and stamens sticking out the bottom. They don't need to know the name of it. You don't need to know the name. You just need to feel what it is and enjoy it. So that's just from the garden, without trying to have any special plants that we need to buy in. So you've got your own, hopefully you've got your own garden, but if you haven't and you've got a courtyard or a small path area that's hard and you can't plant in it, perhaps the next best thing is to think about plants you could put into pots and arrange things so that people are able to access them. So what sorts, here's some examples. Of course, there are many, but I've just got a few examples. And one of the most common ones, which you probably know, lamb's ears or lamb's lugs, which have a very, very soft, hairy leaf. So this is a great one and are commonly used in sensory gardens because it's so soft. I'm trying to think what it makes me think of, maybe rubbing velvet or something like that. That's a really good one. And again, good thing to have, a plant to have, so you can talk about why is it hairy? What makes it hairy? What is the hair on it doing? And of course, what it's doing is protecting it from harsh sunlight. So that tells us how we're going to plant it. Another plant which is useful, and again, you could put these in a group in a container, is this grass, which will get bigger. It won't get very big. It's very soft. It wafts in the wind, and you could feel it wafting. And if you really look hard, you'll see that the grasses themselves are sort of rolled And so again, they control the amount of moisture that's lost from the leaf blade. So grass in your lawn is much wider, but this one, which is called Stipa tenuissima, is a lovely plant which easily could go into a container. And we know it would like a sunny position, so that can go very nicely with the Stachys. They would go together well. Another hairy-leafed plant is this one, which is a Lychnis. You'll probably be used to the tall stems with grey stems with little magenta pink flowers on the top. They haven't come out yet, but they will do soon. There's an example of some of the flowers on the label. So that as a group could be together in a container, giving the sort of aspects that like sunlight, well-drained soil, so they can go together as well. So that would be useful if you have a funny spot. If you don't have such a funny spot, perhaps you want to group some plants together which are not grey-leaved. So here's some primulas that have just come out of my winter bedding, but you can see big leaves, quite hard leaves, lots of veining, lots of texture, quite happy in a more shady situation. And there's a hollyhock. So hollyhocks have big leaves too, big round leaves. Yes, you get very tall plant from it, but you can get smaller hollyhocks. So plants like that would go together very well too, as in an area which isn't as sunny as the other one. So if you're doing containers, what do we need to think about? We need to think about how people will access the containers. If they're too low down, sometimes that's a problem for people who can't bend. So a good idea would be to make a container and perhaps put it up onto some sort of table or some stand so that it's actually up at the level where people can easily touch it without having to bend if that's a problem for them. The other thing is to position them perhaps where people are sitting. So if you've got a bench, then you could put a pot right next door to it where people can very easily stroke the plant and get a sensation from it and enjoy what's happening and how it feels. And the sort of mindfulness, people talk about mindfulness when you go into green spaces, but touching is also a way of connecting with nature and subconsciously feeling that nature is calming as well. So if we are planting up these pots, that's another activity for a group. And it's another activity which involves texture and touch. So if I'm planting my grey leaf plants, which I know want sunshine, well-drained soil, and so on, then I'm going to get compost. I'm going to add some sand for drainage. Or I'm going to add some grit for drainage. And these are all things which would be wonderful to feel. Some people really like rummaging through, and we've got to break down the lumps and bumps of the soil. So touching it and pushing it around and feeling your hands in the soil is a wonderful feeling. But if people are not so keen on touching it directly, then a pair of little gloves, which are still thin enough, these thin disposable gloves, for you to actually feel the soil, to feel the gravel or the sand. So what I do is get people to touch it and feel it and really enjoy feeling the soil and what they're doing. And then mixing half compost and half sand. And again, the sand needs to be broken down. You can feel the grittiness of it. This sand is going to allow any moisture, like we've been having, to be able to run through the compost and not settle in a wet lump because it's been so rainy. So that if you do half and half, pretty much for the grey leaf plants, that's really going to allow them to do well. And also, there's the pleasure of breaking down the lumps and breaking that, and reminding people perhaps of the days when they used to garden more, or for people who are new to it, then the new way of gardening. So having got our mixture together, we're going to get a pot. So here is a big pot with a hole, of course, in the bottom. I'm going to put crocks, which are bits of old pot that are broken or old stones, and cover the hole in the bottom of the pot. Then we can put our soil in. And pop in the plants that we want to show either the mixture of plants that we talked about before, or alternatively, just put in one big plant which you know has good textural feeling. So it can be, this is a thyme plant. So not only is it going to give you the feeling of texture, which is rather nice with the small leaves, it's going to give you the ability to taste it, of course, which is another sense. It also will give off scent as well. So you've got several wonderful senses all in one go, and that would be a wonderful pot to put right next to, say, where someone's sitting, and so on. So that moves on to planting up with more perhaps herbs. So there's thyme, that's a lovely big one. This is another plant which fantastic, either in the border or in a pot. This is fennel. And fennel is this wonderful light feathery feeling. So it's very, I would say moorish. You want to feel it because it's so soft and so light, but it also, again, gives off a scent. It's also edible, so that's not a problem. And also it develops taste as well. But that could go into a pot with other plants of the same sort of idea. Chives, lovely tool. So they've all got different textures, and that's the thing to do, is to find plants which have different textures, which are going to feel differently for different people. And maybe some, I've only got cutting off bits, but mint would be nice, or even sage, which is another plant which has a slightly hairy leaf as well. So that would be a fantastic mixture. Or they can be put in a window box. If you haven't got space outside, you could have that. You can finish off the top of the soil with this gravel, which again will allow the water, any excess rain, to go through, but also it's another texture. So it's a wonderful crunchy feel to use as well. And another thing you could use, if you don't want to use that and want to use, is stones. Again, another feel. It might remind people of going to the seaside and picking up stones. There are all sorts of different shapes. So stones can be a wonderful material to give texture, especially next to the softness of the plants too. So a bag of stones could be used just to put round the edge or put round the bottom, or put somewhere in a garden where you're going to have that sort of texture. Now, if you absolutely don't have any room outside and can't even put a window box in, what should you do? Well, you could bring in indoor plants. Use the indoor plants that you've got, perhaps around in your building. Again, checking that they aren't harmful, because some indoor plants can be irritating to people's skin or sap. And of course, some plants will be thorny and spiky like cactus. So I would not suggest cactus as an example. But these plants here are, as you can see, are succulent, what we call succulents. So they have leaves which hold moisture, and you can feel they're quite thick. So that would be an interesting experience to, rather than just look at them, again, close your eyes and feel. What do they feel like? Do they feel plasticky? Do they feel soft? Have they got a smooth edge to them? This variegated one is a succulent, surprisingly, and completely different leaves, but it has a slightly jaggy edge. So I can feel the jaggy edge. So that would be something to point out and suggest to people. So these are quite ordinary succulents that you find in any house, but also I have this one, the common spider plant, which many of you may have around, but that gives a completely different effect when you're feeling it. The leaves are long. The leaves are quite narrow, and I can feel at the back a ridge, which must be the ridge, the rib of the leaf. It has lots of leaves, and they're all coming from the middle. So again, eyes shut, or for people with visual impairment to talk about what they think. And probably there'll be lots of people who are perhaps older who will remember having had a spider plant in their house. And they will talk about where it was and what it was like, what it did. So not just creating new memories, but also older memories. Another plant for indoors will be the peace lily. Which you probably have very commonly available to people, with white flowers and shiny glossy leaves, which again, another texture, wider leaves this time, shiny but softer. And the flower has an interesting shape to feel. It's quite hard in the middle, with a soft spathe lily effect. That hard centre is quite unusual. So that's a very interesting one, and perhaps people could draw what they're thinking as they're doing it. If you haven't got many houseplants or you want to do something differently, then you may remember that we looked at drying flowers that were in our gardens in the autumn. And these will have another thing to do, which is feeling these dried flower stems. What do they feel like? Are they rough? They make a noise as well, so that's an interesting effect. So these ones I kept from last year. We were making arrangements with them. They can be kept. This is Nigella, which is love in the mist, lovely blue flower in the summer. There it is with its lovely seed head too. So it means that you can do things with the use of touch at different times in the year, when perhaps going outside the weather's not so good or everything is over. Here's poppy heads too. So those are a lovely shape as well. And this is an allium that was seed head of an allium. So it's slightly spiky, quite delicate, long stem. And then the beech leaves that we used from the autumn too. They make a noise, they're shiny. How do they feel? So that's a way of looking at touch and looking at things, perhaps in the winter or after most of the growth period is over. And something else, we should remember that it's not just our hands that feel touch, but our feet can too. So sometimes for older people or people with dementia who are not getting out and about, then feeling with bare feet into a tray of sand can remind them of holidays by the beach. Or pea shingle can be used as well. And again, that might recreate memories that they had of years past when they were children running around in the beach. If you were able to get people to put their bare feet onto grass, there's another reminder of often being a child and running around in the grass. So it gives you a talking point, a memory that you had once upon a time. Another thing that you can have in the garden, not plants this time, but water. Perhaps water, safe water. So I'm not suggesting a pond, but perhaps a water feature which has water flowing over a big stone, an object where people can put their hands and feel the water flowing over it. So it can be easily touched and of course heard as well, which is another sense to use as well. Or perhaps if you want to do something indoors, you could use a bowl of water, and into the bowl of water you could always add the stones that you had before. People can gently touch the water, which is cooling in the summer or just pleasurable, and feel what the effect of the water is on the stones. Are they rough? Are they shiny? Does it make them feel easier to hold? So don't forget to look around and find good textures in the plants, in the flowers, all year round, because at different times of year, there'll be different things coming out. For instance, in the summer, there'll be sunflowers or more daisy flowered things. There'll be all sorts of flowers. You could even look at roses, cut them off, get people to pull the petals off the roses and feel what they feel like, so that you're not actually touching the rose as such. So it won't matter if there's thorns, but you could just feel what the roses are like. Other things can be forest bark. If you happen to have forest bark in your landscape, what does that feel like? Rough and textural. And then of course, as we go into the autumn, perhaps a bowl of fallen leaves, or if people can go out, they can touch the fallen leaves and see what they feel like. Are they crackly? What do they feel? Are they large or soft? And there's masses of things around. So it's a matter of really looking to see what's available and perhaps just adding things to enhance what you've already got. So I hope that's helped you think about touch in the garden and what you can be doing. So it'll be interesting to know what you think about that, what your experiences are of using touch with your group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, or pop it in the chat. I'm just going to remove the spotlight here so that we can see everybody. Just quickly, Jude has put in chat to say be careful with peace lilies. They aren't technically poisonous, but contain a compound that can be extremely bothersome to pets, children, and adults if consumed. Pollen can stick to fur, paws, So just be careful with the peace lily.
Good point. Good point.
Does anybody have any questions? Just feel free to shout out if you do. So the first Zoom, the live demo that we did in the sensory garden was site, and that can be found on our YouTube channel. And then we do have, I can just double check the dates for you. Bear with me 2 seconds for the next 2. So we've got scent on the 20th of June at 2 o'clock, and we have taste on the 7th of August at 2 o'clock. And all sessions are recorded and uploaded onto YouTube as well, so you can go back and watch the one on site.
I was just going to add, one of the things I didn't mention but should have done is at the beginning when I was talking about looking for texture, and that you can look for texture of the bark of trees. What you can do, and you have to plan ahead obviously, is if you've got a landscape or a park or a wood nearby, you could look again for trees that have interesting texture. And another thing you can do, apart from just feeling the texture with your hands, is, and this was an idea from the Sensory Trust, is to get a piece of white material, say an old sheet or something like that, calico, and put it together. You would need 2 people to do this, or maybe 3 at each tree. Put it over the bark, and with a big wax crayon on its side, rub. So you're taking basically a rubbing of the bark, and so you could look about and see what the bark texture is like, as well as having felt it with your hands. You can then look at it, and you can have fun using different coloured wax crayons to rub against it, and just sort of, it gives you something to talk about too, about the trees. So that's a good one to do any time of year, obviously.
Has anybody had any activities that they've done in the past to do with touch that they'd like to share, or any ideas of activities that they're going to take away and do with their group?
We did do a seaside one. We had sand and water and that, and it did trigger a lot of conversations about holidays and things like that, things that they remembered. And they thought it was really funny having their feet in sand. You know, they really enjoyed it. Not so much the water, because it wasn't roasting, but definitely the sand did trigger a lot of conversations. And we do have a wee decking area that we use for plants and things, and we do try to have herbs as that and that as well, to give them the different smells from them. But I never really thought about the leaves and plants. Obviously I've been watching this here, and there's so many different ones. It is really quite interesting, you know, that all the different plants have different textures, but I hadn't really thought about that.
Well, hopefully that will be another activity for your group, to be able to touch them and talk about what they feel like.
They help to plant everything, and they get their hands in the soil and all that. So a lot of them like the garden and like gardening, and so this will be another wee thing that I'll definitely do. I'll need to look back on your site one as well and see what's in that.
Another idea in terms of using the dried plants as well is that you can create a ceramic relief by pressing them into the clay, and you can use air drying clay if you don't have access to a kiln. So we've done things like that before. So that can be quite enjoyable, because you can go sort of foraging for all the different plants that you want to use. and it can be quite a nice way to have a sort of permanent reminder of the things that you found if you've gone to a particular place. We're quite fortunate that we've got a garden that we can access at the centre where I work, so we have things that are quite readily available. But it could be something that people could bring in from home if need be, depending on where you work. But that's quite a nice, easy way to create something that they can keep. You can make like a little wall plaque or something like that quite easily, just using a rolling pin to get it quite thin, about a centimetre, and then place your plants on top and roll over the top, and then they can paint it or put a varnish on it once it's all finished. So it's quite a nice little project, and it allows you to really study all the forms of the leaves, and you can actually see quite a lot of detail in the clay. It's quite a good way to see the shapes of the leaves and things like that, and different sort of aesthetic sides to it.
That's a great idea. I hadn't thought about using plants like the dried flowers like that, and that's an excellent idea.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, I haven't used it in my current job, but I've used it with kids, and you know you can get that special paper that bleaches in the sun. So if you put a plant on it, I think you wet it and you put a plant on it and let it sit in 10 minutes in the sunlight, the imprint of the plant transfers onto the paper. And that's quite good as well. You know, like you know, just to keep that memory of the plants or the leaves or anything. I forget what the name of it is, but it's special paper, and it's really quite good.
That's a great way of extending, having felt for the nice texture that you like, then you can capture that.
Yeah,
on that
I think
paper. That's brilliant.
yeah, I think you just put the plant on the paper and let it sit for 10 minutes, and then you put the paper in the water, and the plant turns blue, and so you can frame it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. Janet, yeah.
I'm just thinking flower arranging was one of the things I was thinking, just to, make it a nice shape. You can make fantastic shapes out of that, of the final effect of that. But also, I was thinking of flower press and similar thoughts, really, sort of visual, but also that maybe you can feel both of those things as well, and make the pressed flowers into some kind of picture at the end and create a new thing out of it. So there's a lot of things you could do. Yeah.
No, that's great. You can be so inventive with plants. That's the wonderful thing. And I see someone put up the message that it's cyanotype paper. So now we know how to do it, Hazel.
Someone's also asking the name of the YouTube channel. So it's Trellis Scotland. But what I'll do is you receive a follow-up email that I think will probably come out to you tomorrow. So I'll put the link to the site video on there, and then you can also have a look at all the other videos that are on there as well, because there's loads of activities similar to the kind of some of the ones that came up today that you can have a look at as well. You can find the recordings on the website as well, but probably best place is YouTube. Any more questions or ideas? I think that might be everybody. Well, thank you very much for sharing all those great ideas. Caroline, is there anything else that you would like to say before I finish up the session?
It's just very interesting to hear other people's experiences of using different methods to use plants, especially, and using their textures. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for today. That was nice.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.